And there you go. You're on, Lucia.
Hi, everyone. Thank you for inviting me to speak tonight. I don't think I've ever been invited to give a talk on 9/11, and it's a hard day for our country, and I just wanted to acknowledge, the people that are still suffering from loss during that time, and for those who died in the bombing. So, anyway, just wanted to start out with that acknowledgement. Um, okay, we'll go ahead. Let's see. Oh. Oh, here we go. All right. So I took a circuitous route to becoming an artist. I was an undergraduate art major, but I needed to pursue a career so I could support my family. And I didn't reinvent myself as an artist until I was in my 50s. I couldn't have done this without the support of my colleagues at the Evergreen State College and later on the Puget Sound book artist community. Nurtured by Jane Carlin at Collins Library at the University of Puget Sound. And also, I'd like to acknowledge Cynthia Sears, who, for many of us, has given us the confidence really to continue making artist books by valuing the art that we make. So, tonight I'm going to focus on my work that deals with habitat loss in the Northwest and habitat restoration. I'll talk about what got me started, my motivation, a few early attempts, how I began to add dimension by learning to make handmade paper, talk about a little bit of current work, and then attempts to make my work accessible to a wider audience by creating free downloadable books, and then a few efforts I made to contribute to the book arts community. So I'll first talk about my motivation. So I grew up, actually, we can start with this one. I grew up in this house in Olympia. It's on Puget Sound on Cooper Point, and on the right you can see the beach that I roamed as a little kid. Then my parents moved me when I was 13 to California, and I just had a fit. And I've always wanted to come back to the Northwest, which I finally was able to do. I grew up roaming these forests and beaches, and my attachment to this land has really grown over the last 70 years. I'm 76 now. I moved to Olympia when I was 6. As a child, I loved to watch the seasonal changes. And in the summer, we used to pick, wild blackberries and have a lot of fun making pies and jam and that sort of thing. And much later in life, I had the opportunity to teach at the Evergreen State College. And I had the opportunity to learn about the indigenous history of our area. And I was fortunate to teach in interdisciplinary art science programs. I primarily taught drawing and making artist books, handmade paper, things like that. So the programs I taught in were things like picturing plants with botany and art, drawing from the sea, marine biology and art, reading rocks, geology and art, and river reciprocity, stream ecology and art. It was a lot of fun and I learned a lot. Evergreen emphasizes theory and practice. So a lot of my students did field work and restoration projects for the Nisqually River area and working with the Nisqually tribe and the Nisqually Education Project. On the left, you can see them here learning how to do water testing, and then they would go into the schools and teach the kids how to do water testing. So that was really a lot of fun. And then on the right, you can see them doing some soil work and tree planting. For me, habitat loss in our area is personal. And it's visible everywhere and very heartbreaking. One of the first things I noticed as I became more ecologically aware is that my new neighbors never knew where they were. nor did they know anything about the land that they had purchased. And so the first thing they would do is they might buy a house, and if they were lucky, have some sort of forest landscaping with forest understory. And the first thing they would do is park out their land. So they would take out all the understory, plant grass, and then they would run their lawnmowers, those big truck lawnmowers, over the tree roots, causing them to suffocate in the clay soil. Um, Recently, with the pandemic and the change to just in case management, we are noticing a huge increase in the number of very large, like 1 million square foot buildings being created, especially in Thurston County, to house Amazon, Uline, Target, Distribution Center, Home Depot, Trader Joe's. All of them are building these gigantic warehouses. So here we have on the left a picture of the Nisqually. This is the Nisqually River Delta. This is I-5. Here's the Nisqually River. And on the left, this is 1985. You can see this huge forested area. And then if you look on the right, you can see the same image. Oops, sorry about that. Same image with these giant warehouses, 1.2 million square feet. And as I researched this a little bit, I came across this company called Clayco, and they're advertising to build you a giant warehouse with a view of Mount Rainier and the Puget Sound as they deforest the land around it, because our buying habits are changing. So it's a complicated issue, but I've made some attempts over my life to try to work on being positive and working on habitat restoration. So I'm going to talk a little bit about some early things I tried to do. My first attempts came from my background in drawing and watercolor painting. And I decided I would just point fingers at wrongdoers. That was my plan. And I learned to make artist books at Penland School, where I would go in the summer when I wasn't teaching. So in this case, this is called, these are some pages from a little book called A Book About Brush. And so when people think about the understory, they often call it brush. And so here I have the machine coming to get the brush, and then the hummingbirds, who are very aggressive, chasing the machine out of the picture. Can you all see both sides? Okay. Okay. My next attempt focused on birds who lived at different parts of the understory, like birds that lived in the top of the trees, birds that lived in the lower canopy, the understory, and ground nesters. So I chose 4 or 5 birds to emphasize. And I made a rant about what my neighbors were doing to destroy the habitat. And I talked to them, and I wrote down some of the things that I learned from them, which was basically that they were ignorant. So the cover looks like this. This section here focuses on cedar waxwings. So I have some examples of the cedar waxwings. This was so cute. They were in a tree in my neighborhood eating cascara berries and then passing them along to the recently fledged ones. So it's nice to see that. And elderberry, which they also love. And then there was an attempt on Cooper Point to put in a whole bunch of housing developments like Tamishan. And this is an area where I grew up as a child, one of the forests, actually. And so I did overlays And then the last picture would be of the dead bird. So it's kind of like live bird to dead bird. And each one of them has a different overlay, like a pesticide or parking out the land or whatever. You can see the rant here. I'm saying, keep the dead trees. Don't run over fragile roots with your lawnmower. Don't bulldoze. Don't plant a diverse multi-story. And then I contrasted that with, here's a quote: "When I pulled out that willow in my yard, I didn't think about the fact that birds need good places to hide from predators." From Jill, who's a college professor. So so my emphasis really was on pointing fingers, trying to get at a little bit of education. Then I began to wonder, well, how come my neighbors are so disconnected from where they live? How come they don't know, the natural history and human history of this beautiful area that we live in? So I decided to learn more about it myself and to create a 3-volume set called Notes for a Natural History Encyclopedia of Cooper Point. I made it Notes for a Natural History Encyclopedia so I wouldn't have to be the expert. These are just my notes in case I ever wrote a natural history. That was kind of the idea. Artistic license. So this particular series has 3 volumes. Volume 1 is the herbal. Volume 2 is about it's called the Atlas, and volume 3 is called Place Name Changes. So this one's the herbal, and I'll just show you an example. So the book had I digitally reproduced my original drawings. This is red alder. And then I would research what birds and other animals use red alder, and then what its scientific name was, and then how red alder has been used historically and currently by indigenous people in the area. So it was a big, thick volume. I printed it using the French fold method. So I would print a whole sheet, fold it in half, and then it was folded down the middle and then bound. Difficult. Then the next one was called the Atlas. And this was a lot of fun. I came across a work by T.T. Waterman. Later, it's been reissued by Vi Hilbert and Zahir Zoltar, I think that's what his name is, who do a lot of work with the Lushootseed language. Anyway, T.T. Waterman was he was an anthropologist with the Smithsonian, and he came here in the 1920s, and he interviewed tribal elders all over Puget Sound to learn the indigenous place names. And the indigenous place names tend to tell you something about that place, either a story that happened there or something to beware of if you go there or something like that. They're very meaningful to this area. And I was amazed that I grew up here, but I didn't know any of the indigenous place names or what they meant. So I kayaked up and down all the inlets with this book, going to all the places that were in T.T. Waterman's book and trying to figure out why it was called that. So it took several years. Here's an example of one of the pages. Again, it's a watercolor that's embellished. It's printed on French fold paper, and then I embellished it with gold ink to try to get some more texture into it. So this is about Dickerson Point, which was called Bixabwab. And this is an area by Dana Passage that has a lot of current. And the indigenous name means where they jump. So he didn't say what jumped there. So I had to make that part up. And I decided to honor the orca whales that used to come up into our inlets before they were taken to SeaWorld. and the salmon and other creatures. So I would like make the drawing and then make my musings about why I think it was called that. That's what I did for each of the places that I visited. This is 2 pages from the third volume, which is called Place Name Changes, Notes for a Natural History Encyclopedia. Like, where did we get our place names? So on the left, you'll see one of the pages. It says, like a group of teenage boys carving their initials on trees, the crew of the Wilkes expedition, 1838 to 1842, named the major waterways and points of South Puget Sound after themselves. So all the names we have, Bud Inlet, Hartstein Island, all those things are named after members of the crew of that ship. So I was thinking one of the ways we lose contact is by changes in place names. First by the early explorers to this European explorers. Then later the book goes on to show what the real estate developers are calling their areas. And then the county officials changed all of the sort of, plant-based names of streets to numbers, so it would be easier to find them in an emergency. So we have this whole change of how we label the land that's occurred over the last, since 1838. So that was my attempt to get at place name changes. Then, let's see, where am I on here? Okay. So 15 years ago, got together with Puget Sound book artist, helped create the organization, and I met Deborah Greenwood, and I met a lot of other people too that I see here tonight, like Anne and Jan, and I'm not sure else who's here, maybe Dorothy McChristian. Anyway, so Deborah Greenwood and we were in a paper making workshop together. And after the workshop was over, was Velma Bolyard taught the workshop. After it was over, there was a lot of leftover materials. And she said, well, does anybody want these? And we said, sure, we'll take them. And then we have built over the last 15 years a paper making studio in the basement of her house. And so I was able to I was always concerned in the previous works that I did that they're very flat, the texture is very flat. And I wanted to have more dimension, texture in my materials, and the handmade paper gave me that opportunity. So this book is called Soil Core 1. I made a series of soil cores, and I was teaching at the time in a geology and art program. And so we were out in the woods digging soil pits, and we would dig down, and at the top, you can see, is where the leaf litter is. And then that leaf litter is being eaten by the invertebrates that live in the soil. And then you can see, oh, there was a fire. You can see the remains of the fire, and you go along, oh, there was a volcanic eruption. So as you go into the soil, you learn a lot about the history of the area that you're looking at. So that led to some larger scale work. This one there's 250 discs, handmade paper that represent the layers of the soil found by some geologists up at Mount Rainier. And they kept a journal of their digging efforts up there. And this was at Frying Pan Creek. So they were digging down and taking a look at the stratification, and here's what they wrote. In the stratigraphy of soil layers, we could read the present and ancient history of this forest. We saw a chronicle of changing landscapes that took us back 4,000 years. Stupendous volcanic eruptions, terrifying rains of ash were revealed. not just from the giant volcano, Mount Rainier, a few miles away, but from Mount St. Helens too. Extinct forests and ancient fires, lots of floods. As the two of us contemplate the story of our soil profile, we are reassured. The forests have endured. They have healed the scarred landscapes again and again. Life is incredibly persistent. So this was a lot of fun. Uh, it's now in the Cynthia Sears collection, and one of these days, maybe shown again. And it hangs from 250 golden strings, and each of these discs represent the different layers of the soil that they identified in their soil core. And that's Deborah Greenwood on the left. Inspired by my teaching in another program called Mount Rainier, we learned all about lahars. I don't know if you guys know what a lahar is, but what happens is if Mount Rainier starts to shake, then the friction of the shaking um, and the melting of underneath the glaciers, maybe there's a big pool of melted water, and the combination comes together and melts the ice, and it all comes down in a giant flood really fast down the valleys. It's done this many times historically. And so we were learning about Ording. I don't know if you guys know where that is. It's in one of the trying to think of the word, watersheds of Mount Rainier. And when they were building Ording to house new people in the Puget Sound area, they dug the basements and the foundation, and they found dead standing trees. So these trees are like 200 feet tall. And so and you can see a dead standing forest up at Mount Rainier. When you go in the entrance by Nisqually, if you turn left and go up that road, you can hike up and see a dead standing forest. But it's caused by when the lahar comes down, it kills all the trees, squashes, the weight of it presses down, and then more soil's built up on top of that. So the idea behind this book was, well, we think we're on solid ground when we walk through the forest. So these are monoprints on handmade paper of things we see on the forest floor, like lichen, for example. But underneath, that tells a different story. There's lots of layers of standing forests, evidence of volcanic eruption, etc., and faults. So we're not really on solid ground here in the Northwest. And that was my attempt to talk about that. In 2021, well, actually starting in maybe 2019 or 18, I started doing a series called Consider What's Lost. And I did several of these books. One of them was on South Puget Sound, and this one, which I did a better job of documenting, is on the central part of Washington State, by Ellensburg. So it includes like the Cascade foothills, river canyons, and the shrub steppe areas. And so what I tried to do in this book, as I was thinking about it, was that I would create something that eventually could be miniaturized and given it like a welcome wagon. I don't know, when we used to move into a new neighborhood, when I was a kid anyway, the welcome wagon would come and they would give you a basket full of information about the neighborhood. So this was going to be my welcome wagon. Haven't gotten around to the miniature version yet, but this is the one of a kind version. And so I'm going to talk to you a little bit more in detail about how I made this work. So there are, let's see where I'm going. Okay. So there are 3 parts. There's a meander book, which you see here. There's an accordion book, and then there's this wrap that wraps around the whole thing. You can see it here. So all of these fold up and fit in this little box. So I'll talk to you first of all about the Meander book. So one thing I like about um, artist books is you can tell different stories. So on, if it's an accordion book, you can have one dialogue going on one side and something different on the other side, and the two together kind of create the meaning. So on on the Meander book, on one side are images of animals that are impacted by agricultural development and housing development in the Central Valley. And then on the other side are prints of native plants in the Central Valley, that in the central area, that support wildlife. So I usually start by doing some researching conservation organization websites, government documents. In this case, they had um, a county shoreline inventory and characterization report where they talked about all the different habitats in the county. And they had really good ecosystem profiles for each of those types of habitats. And then I found on Google Maps this picture of a housing development in process surrounded by agricultural land. So right now, the land that was used or is used for agriculture is being encroached on by housing developments. So once I had that downloaded, that map, I put it into black and white, cut it into a Meander type book, and made a model of what it was that I was planning to make. So you can see that here, cutting it apart, folding it up. And then I gathered images of wildlife that I wanted to use in the process. Then I traced the map images and kept track of where they would fall in the grid. And then I needed to make the paper. I like to make handmade paper because I can embed things in it that help the paper create the meaning. So in this case, I chose a very laborious process where with kozo fiber. So kozo is um, a type of mulberry plant, and it's a really strong fiber. And so I used that for this particular book. So we had to soak it, then cook it, and then it's full of all these little I can't remember the name for them, but anyway, they're little nits of bark. So you have to clean all those up. This is why Japanese paper costs so much when you buy it already made. Then we do have Debbie and I do have a critter, which is a machine that does pounds the fiber into pulp after it's cooked, but it doesn't work on kozo. It tends to create lots of little knots and doesn't make a very nice product. So we hand beat the kozo, which takes another few hours. And then comes time to make the paper. So in order to make the paper have meaning, I like to get in the idea that the reason we have housing developments, of course, we need housing for people, but also it makes a ton of money for somebody. So what I did was I cut up money and I embedded it in the paper. So here I am cutting up the money, and then I used a decal box, which is a screen that has like a moat around it. And I put the pulp in there along with the money, and then lift it up out of the water, and then cooch it onto these felts so that comes out like this. And you can see that the paper is embedded with the money. Then once the paper was pressed and dried, I cut it into squares, and then I machine stitched a grid on it. And to make it look like graph paper. And this is an idea that I learned from Robert Smithson. He's the guy that built that big spiral in the Salt Lake. He's an earthworks artist. Anyway, he always thought that there was a difference between, like, when developers are thinking about a landscape, like those guys that are, making those big warehouses, they live in California or New York or somewhere else, and they haven't even been there, right? And they're making this thing on paper, and it's very distant, very different than if they were, marching through the forest. Maybe they wouldn't care, but it's a very different thing to be there versus be distant from there. So I tried to do that by starting with the graph paper. And so then the field guides helped me figure out the animals that co-evolved with the native plants for food and shelter in the region that could be affected by loss of habitat. And so I found images of those and cut them out on handmade paper and then embroidered the line drawings to bring out some more depth. Then I took those and I stitched them onto the grid. You can see here, stitching them onto the gridded paper. And then I took the map that I made and I think I used the pencil transfer technique, but I transferred a drawing onto the grid that I could use for the embroidered part. So that's how I would just, follow the lines on the back side and then go over them on the front side with the graphite to transfer it. And then here I am stitching. You can see how I transferred the drawing, and now I'm stitching on there the either the agricultural, there's a railroad in there, there's a road, and then there's this real estate development. The other side of the Meander book is made up of prints from that I made, monoprints from plants that I gathered. So I went to Ellensburg. We stayed there a few days, and we looked at all the different habitats. And I collected plants from the different habitats that were in abundance. I didn't want to take any native plant that isn't in abundance, and take samples of them. Like you can see the lupin, and this is can't remember exactly all the names of them all, but anyway. And then I put them. I brought along a bunch of phone books and I pressed the plants in Ellensburg. Then back home in the studio, I used Debbie Greenwood's press and I made the monoprints. So I used the Kozo paper, again, more Kozo paper on top of inked plants that I had pressed to come out with these images, which I then stitched together to make the back of the book, of the Meander book. You can see here. So I blanket stitched the back to the front all around, and then did the Meander stitching using a blanket stitch. No, I did a weaving between the blanket stitches. I started adding to these Consider What's Lost books, a more straightforward, like, welcome to the neighborhood. I'd like to introduce you to the habitats and native plants in your area, kind of approach, because the first book I made, people didn't get it. So the first version of this was just the Meander book. People didn't understand it. So I said, okay, I'll make it really clear. So here's an example of one of the pages, which is hand embroidered. In the drier sage steppe, listen for bees and watch for butterflies attracted to wildflowers like balsam root, lupin, and loco weed. Those were the ones I showed you in the previous image that I had forgotten the names of. Anyway, so it goes on through the various habitats. and introduce them to the plants and animals in that habitat. Then finally, I wanted to create a box for them to fit in or a wrap. So I made this out of handmade paper. This is, I think it's not Swiss chard. What's this? Rhubarb paper. Anyway, and I researched I was teaching in a program called River Reciprocity. So I learned all about, and in the soils programs, it was a permaculture class, and I learned all about the organisms that live in the soil. So I made drawings of those and then embroidered them onto this paper. So that was the project. It was a lot of fun. This particular one is housed at Central Washington University Special Collections. A couple of recent works that I wanted to talk about tonight. The first one, let me get my notes in order here so I don't get lost. The first one is called Journey to Mount Rainier, What Abby Williams Hill Saw and Didn't Know. So I'd like to thank the Collins Library archive staff and Jane Carlin and Tiffany McBain from the University of Puget Sound. Then they invited book artists to come to the archive and learn all about Abby Williams Hill and respond to some aspect of her work. She was an artist who lived in Tacoma in the late 19th and early 20th centuries. And she was a pretty amazing plein air artist who traveled around on the railroads, painting wilderness scenes all over the West, which then the railroads used in their advertising. She'd take her kids there. She went backpacking, hiking, hung from cliffs to make these paintings. Pretty amazing person. So I had to really think hard about my relationship with her. And since I did know quite a bit about Mount Rainier, I decided to do focus on her travels to Mount Rainier on her 26-day journey in 1895, before it was a national park. And I tried to think about comparing her journey with mine. So my journey, her journey, she traveled by rowboat, logging wagon, horseback, train. It took her 6 days to get there. It takes me 2.5 hours. So it's amazing what she had to go through to get there. And she rode a horse all the way home from Mount Rainier, from Paradise at Mount Rainier to Tacoma, if you can imagine that. But like many newcomers to the Northwest, she didn't know much about the indigenous history of the area, and she didn't really know where she was. She did, like many of us, really, myself included. When we go out on a prairie or go up to Paradise, we're so captivated by the beauty, and that we want to capture what's picturesque, and we kind of don't really think about its history that much. And so I wanted to draw attention to the history. And I had an opportunity to be educated by the Nisqually tribe about their history when I became a salmon steward 10 years ago, I think, and began participating in the Nisqually River Education Project. So I'm pretty familiar with her route and the history. So there are, I can't remember how many folios, 6 or 7 folios that I'll show you. This one's closed. This is about her first day, July 23rd, 1895. And here it is open. So it has a baseball stitched opening, which I learned from Nancy Brones, who learned it from Mayor Blocker, I think. Really cool way to stitch single sheets together. So what I did was I basically embellished his prints of historical maps with my drawings and symbols and embroidery. And so it's two parts. One is the map showing her route, which I always show in red embroidery. It lists some of the habitats like the prairie and the forests and the Puget Sound where she traveled. And then I point out some historical places along the way, like uh, uh, one of the Nisqually villages, um, Shananam Creek, where the Medicine Creek Treaty was signed, um, ancestral homes of different groups that lived at the heads of each of these inlets and then were consolidated into one Squaxin Island tribe by the federal government. And then I also included um, snippets from her journals. So I tried to tell the story about what she didn't know in the key that follows along on the left-hand side. Sometimes in making the drawing, like I made this drawing of her in a rowboat, I didn't have a picture of that, so I had to make it up. Find a boat that looked like from that time period, and figured she probably didn't row herself because it was really a long way from Steilacoom all the way down to Henderson Inlet. So I took some license there. On the back of each of these folios, depending on the habitat she traveled through, the back has printed images of either forest prints or drawings of, say, prairie plants or subalpine meadow plants. Here's another folio. This is from August 4th through 6th, 1895. She was up at the area we call Paradise. There was a camp there called Camp of the Clouds. There's a place called Alta Vista. And so I've identified, where the glaciers were, the subalpine forest areas, the subalpine meadows. Her journal is full of, I fell down on this particular, she fell down, she wasn't really properly clothed to be up there, and she fell on the ice all the time. So this one talks about how she had to mend her clothing in 43 places because she had fallen so many times. And then she got someone to put these kind of nails in the bottoms of her shoes so she could dig into the ice. And then over here, she talks about seeing all these beautiful flowers that no other humans have ever seen. And so I juxtaposed that with embroidery in different colors showing, number one, that this was a historical area where the Nisqually and Yakima tribes hunted, gathered for like 8,000 years. And then when the Europeans got interested in climbing Mount Rainier, actually were the people on the team that helped them travel up there, acknowledging that history. And on the back of these that are taken up at Paradise, I have plants from the subalpine meadows that are based on my drawings. My most recent project is called Seasonal Companion, Red Flowering Currant. And basically it's drawings in embroidery on top of collages of fabric mounted on handmade paper. And then around each one is a mat that is held by magnets and can be removed from the portfolio and shown as two-dimensional art. So I'll tell you a little bit about what my motivation on this one was. As you know, can tell by now I'm interested in native plants and the relationship between native plants and animals. And I've taken a lot of photographs of red flowering currant through the seasons and made work about that. And I was rereading Kimmerer's Braiding Sweetgrass. I think some of you may be aware of that book. It's really wonderful. And she really emphasizes, that if we really study plants closely, we can see something we can learn from them, some value we could incorporate into our own lives. So as we're living in this tumultuous time in this country, I was trying to find some positive things I could learn from this plant. So there's 6 folios, and each one represents a different value. So there's welcome, there's hosting, there's fueling, um, nourishing, and providing hope. Um, I'll show you a detail of one of them. So this is the late spring folio. So on the front, it's embroidered, late spring, and then it has hosting because the red flowering currant hosts the zephyr butterfly larvae, eggs and larvae. And here I've made a detail of what the embroidery looks like. So now I'm going to switch gears and talk about the problem with making precious one-of-a-kind artist books. So here I am. I'm an artist. I like to make precious books, but my message is environmental. So how am I going to reach, if my books are in, university collections or, museum collections, how's that going to reach a large audience? So I decided to try to convert some of them into downloadable free books for educational purposes. So I'll talk about this one first. This was called the Nisqually Delta Restoration Project. And it's made up of digital prints of original watercolor paintings. So I first started by making, this was going to be kind of a meander book. And you can't see the dimensionality of it, but this is a collage. The outside of it is actually a mat that I've painted to make a map of the Nisqually Delta. So the Nisqually Delta was settled by Europeans and made into a dairy farm, and they brought in reed canary grass, which is an invasive species, and that's traveled now through clogging a lot of our waterways. Anyway, so the before the 16 tiles of the before the restoration all have this monoculture, all reed canary grass in the middle, and the outside around the edges creates the map. So here's the I-5 dike. These are the agricultural dikes. This is the railroad dike. So I wanted to honor the work of the Nisqually tribe. So the Nisqually tribe actually purchased this land from this side of the Nisqually Delta, and the federal government, due to the work of this amazing woman in Olympia, it was going to be a landfill or a port, but she gathered together and really organized people to create this Nisqually Wildlife Refuge. So the federal government owns this side. So the Nisqually Indians removed the dikes on their side of the river first and showed that it could be done. And in one tidal change, it kills all that reed canary grass and creates an estuary. Imagine, we spent a lot of time digging up reed canary grass from, ditches and waterways when I was doing restoration work with students. And this was a really ingenious scheme. So the other side of this meander book is another set of these mats with the watercolor collages showing that in the future, what we hope will happen to this area now that it has been reestablished as an estuary. And actually now they're doing lots of studies, and there's little salmon coming from all over Puget Sound to grow up in this estuary before making their way into the deeper waters. So these are some of the animals that wildlife that we hope will come back and have come back. So that was the initial thing. And then I decided to make a project, the Nisqually Delta Restoration Puzzle. And I created this puzzle activity and a website that goes with it where people can go and they can download um, this this book for free. So if you go there to download, what you'll find is a booklet you can print out on legal size paper, and you can, stitch it together yourself. And it tells the history of the Nisqually River Delta and the restoration efforts, and has some activities of map reading and identifying organisms that can be used by school children. So I've done some trainings about this with Nisqually. Along the Nisqually River, there are a lot of elementary schools. So I've worked with some of the teachers about showing them this book. And then on the right-hand side, you can see what you download from the website, basically side by side, the front and the back, and you just cut them out and fold them in half, and then they become one side of the puzzle. So if I go back here, you'll start out with the puzzle. So you have to put the puzzle together, and it looks like this on one side. And then when you want to restore the estuary, you just turn the pieces over and you have the power of restoring the estuary. Was the idea. Anyway, the second project that I worked on is called the Native Plant Magic Book, Pacific Northwest Native Plant Magic Book process puzzle. And this, I created this with some funding from the city of Tacoma to try to make people in an urban area. I did move to Tacoma in 2003 because of a house fire in Olympia. So I wanted to figure out, well, how do I get people living in an more urban area interested in native plants? So they helped fund the project. And then Evergreen State College hosts these websites. So these are downloadable booklets that people can use to learn about native plants and hopefully be inspired to create their own native plant gardens at home, maybe pollinator pathways through their neighborhood, maybe connecting schools with parks, becoming citizen scientists, that kind of thing. So there are 3 plants that are highlighted in this project. One is red flowering currant, and the way they're organized is by phenology. So they'll start with the flowering or the budding, and then how that turns into the fruits, and then the fall leaves, and then highlights the animals and birds that use the plant during different parts of the season. So that's the red flowering currant one. This is the salal one. You can see again, budding, flowering, flowers turn into little berries. Berries get green and berries get dark purple. And then this one is vine maple. So flowering, turning into flowers into samaras, attracting the wildlife, etc. So you can see the idea. And then on the back side, as you open it up, it has some information about the plant. This is a modified Jacob's Ladder book that I learned from Rebecca Chomley, who learned it from Bonnie Thompson Norman. So anyway, so that's what that is. You can download it in color or black and white. And my idea about this is that if you download the pages in black and white and you use the website to learn to hand color, learn what the plants look like and hand color them, then you'd be able to better recognize the plants in the field. So this is what it looks like for you can download them in color or black and white, but this is what it looks like. And then here it asks you questions, what's the name of the plant? How big does it grow? Is it a tree or a shrub? Write your answer here. And then when does it bud and flower? Who pollinates the plant? So it asks you all these questions that you can go to the website and get research the answers right on the website to these questions. So the book is made up of, this is the front and back of the legal size paper. And then this is one page, which I call cards. They're inserts that one puts in and out, weaves in and out of the others. So you just basically cut out the gray areas to assemble the book. So I created this website and it has a lot of information on it. It'll tell you, about the project, who the artist was, I gave him permission to download this for free for educational purposes, why native plants are important, that they take less water, it's less yard work for cultural reasons, and that they define our area. They're very important to Indigenous people here. Ecological reasons, supporting wildlife, and educational and health reasons for us, because we like to get out and do forest walks or prairie walks, or being out in nature is a really healthy thing that we can do. We especially learned this, me and Ann Gates anyway, in the pandemic, when we would do pretty much weekly walks at Point Defiance Park. So nature's very healing and supportive. So that's what this is, a little polemic about that. Then you can download the books. Then there's a plant image library and an animal image library. They have pictures of what the plant looks like in different seasons. They talk about the common name, the Lashutsi name, and the scientific name. They link you to the Tulalip Lashutsi language website, where you can hear how the Lashutsi name is pronounced, and for some of them find stories like Vi Hilbert reading stories. It's a pretty cool website that they have. And then finally there's a resource section, and that has where to see native plants in the South Puget Sound, how to keep a nature journal, what are some good field guides, how to learn Lashute seed, or if you live in Puyallup area, Twilshute seed, which is our dialect, how to plant native plant gardens, where to volunteer and to help with restoration in our area, how to become a citizen scientist. So that's my attempt to try to create less precious artist books. The last thing I'm going to talk about is a little bit of community building that I've done over the last few years. So, and then I'll be done and happy to answer lots of questions, I hope. So when I was transitioning at Evergreen into teaching art with scientists, I had a mentor, Joe Fedderson. He's from the Colville tribe. He's faculty at Evergreen and made artist books and printmaking, and he and I taught together. And he really encouraged me to think about my responsibility as an artist to do work that brings other people along, engages other people. So for example, as a member of Colville tribe, he might get invited to do something, and then he'll say, well, if you invite me, you got to invite all of these other artists that I know into your museum show, or you need to, so he's very generous that way. He collects artists' work and then creates exhibits that travel all over the world of plateau Native American artwork. It's really amazing what he does. Anyway, so I had to think about, well, how could I, be more involved? And of course, you all know from being involved in BAG, Celine, and me being involved as a founding member of Puget Sound Book Artists, it's a lot of work to be just in an organization and make it happen. So I've done that for the last 15 years. But I also learned a lot by being a part of Puget Sound Book Artists. And I learned one of the things I learned was how to curate professional exhibits. I'd curated student shows, but I hadn't really curated professional exhibits where you put out a call, maybe an international call, and you have to get a team of people to review the entries and make a catalog and all of that kind of stuff. So I worked with Malpina Chan. She's retired from the Evergreen State College and well-known artist in the area. Anyway, she and I curated the first couple of Puget Sound book artists annual exhibits. So it was really wonderful, and I got to know Jane Carlin, and she had created a really great exhibition space at Collins Library, where she was the director, and she was really open to proposals to co-curate book art exhibits. And I was able to think of that, of curating exhibits around themes that I thought were important. And so, because I was doing all those soil cores and it was the UN Year of Soils, and I'd applied for this famous residency and was declined. I thought, I got to do something for the UN Year of the Soils. So I talked Jane into having this exhibit called Dirt. What scientists How scientists, artists, and poets reflect on the soil and our environment. Initially, she was afraid to have any dirt in the library, as you can imagine, but we made it work. So the exhibit featured artist books, poems, and objects from the University of Puget Sound Natural History Museum. The idea that I had was that visual art and poetry and these natural history objects, even though they're dead and some people think it's like disrespectful to display them or um, to see these stuffed animals. Anyway, but anyway, they can tug at the heartstrings of people who might begin to think about soils maybe differently. So, so we sent out an international call to book artists and poets to create work about soils in honor of the UN Year of the Soils. And in fact, our exhibit got on the UN website, which I'm really proud of. We challenged the artists and poets to make work about the importance of soil and to urge people to take care of this precious resource for future generations. We wanted them to hear about soil degradation through deforestation or pollution, or as we're covering the planet by paving it. So we had 98 people who responded to our call, and we chose 64 participants. The exhibit team, I had a great team. Abir Biswas, who's an earth science professor at Evergreen, Susan Arand, who's an artist, Sharon Sharp, who's a book artist and poet that I met at Penland School, and Deborah Greenwood, who is a wonderful exhibit designer and book artist, paper maker extraordinaire. So I just wanted to show you some of the work that that was in the exhibit. Trying to figure out how to go here. Okay. So this is a work by called Soil Burrowers by Mari Eckstein Gower. And she made this really wonderful book. And she writes, I was working in my garden and I'm so surprised by how alive soil is, not only with plant life, but of creatures of all sizes. By some estimates, 2/3 of the Earth's biodiversity lives in the soil. In my book, I wanted to highlight the variety of life forms that call soil their home. And so this wonderful kind of, I think it's a flag book, fits right into this pocket here. And then she has all kinds of other things in this case that that she made. And then we would pair the book with a poem when we could, um, that someone had written. So this poem was written by Cheryl Shapiro. It's called What Remains. Burrowing, I enter the dark, sweet depths, surrounded, enveloped by fragrant scents of the generations. Burrowing transforming fragments into essential elements, rooting new life. Burrowing through the hard pan, the stones, jagged and round, excavating with nail and nose, passage to an underground nest. We got absolutely a wonderful poems and artist books, and there is a catalog of the exhibit that can be ordered from blurb.com. Let's see. Okay, to the next one. Another book in the exhibit was by Dorothy McQuistion, and it's about the Asarco refining company's smelter that was at Ruston Way, which is in Tacoma. And basically, they extracted copper from metal ores, and the smelter ran for about 100 years. It had a 560-foot stack, and it spewed lead, arsenic, and other toxic elements into the air to all the surrounding cities and towns, over 1,000 square miles of contaminated soil. She's one of my neighbors, and I actually, both of our yards have some of this contamination. So this book is about how when she was raising her kids, she knew nothing about this. And now we get regular emails from the smelter cleanup, Environmental Protection Agency, and all the agencies that are working on cleaning up this mess about how we're supposed to come in the house and immediately wash our hands, take off our shoes, change our clothes, if our pets come in, wipe their feet, things like that, so that we don't pass on these toxic chemicals in the home. They're doing a really good job. They've replaced all of the topsoil at schools, parks, and they come and test your soil. And if it reaches a dangerous level, they replace all the topsoil in your yard. So anyway, so she has in here this, this quiz. How often do you take off your shoes when you enter your house? Never, sometimes, always. So anyway, it's got a copper cover to it. This work is by Jan Dove. Actually, this exhibit, I got to meet for the first time Jan Dove, and we've done some collaborations since then. And it's called How to Develop a Healthy Immune System. And she writes that these suggestions are from a generation of humans whose mothers demanded that they get outside and play. The mothers also said a little hurt never hurt anybody, as well as scrub behind your ears or you'll grow potatoes. More recent generations, as we grow up, we're trying to live in all these germ-free environments with hand sanitizers. Kids are staying inside more. We have epidemics of asthma, more allergy, childhood diabetes. And so she thinks a little bit of dirt helps the body learn how to fend off the really bad bugs. The other exhibit that I co-curated was called Science Stories. We did this during the pandemic. And we invited, the curatorial team was Jane Carlin, Peter Wimberger, who is the director of the University of Puget Sound Natural History Museum, and myself. And we invited 21 artists and 21 scientists whose work represented a strong connection with science and our environment. And the scientists, we recruited them from the Evergreen State College, the University of Puget Sound, University of Washington, Washington State University, National Park Service, and Tacoma Public Utilities. In January of, I'll just move so you can see another slide. In January of 2020, just before the pandemic hit, we had a speed dating event at the museum that provided the opportunities for the artists and the scientists to meet each other. And so they rotated through small tables, learning all the artists learning all about the scientists, scientists learning about the artists, so that they could decide who would like to work together. So as a result of this, we created pairs, and the individual artists, some individual artists already were working with scientists and did that on their own. Others opted to work with a particular science topic on their own. So we really wanted to highlight some of the research going on locally, and make it more accessible than scientific papers in journals would be. When the pandemic hit, we didn't even know if we'd have an exhibit. And so we decided to create this website, as I showed you before, that has all of the books in the exhibit, and then there are 40 interviews with the scientists and the artists who are explaining their work. They're like 5-minute videos. So if you go to this website, you can see all the work, and then you can listen to the artists talk about it. Eventually, we were able to have this exhibit travel. So it traveled from the University of Puget Sound to the Port Angeles Fine Arts Center, to Whitman College Library, and to the Evergreen State College Library in Olympia. I'll just highlight a few of the works in the exhibit. This one is called The Making of a Meadow. The artist is Lucia Bean. She's a well-known Seattle artist, and her scientist was Karen Crandall. And basically, she focused on the Union Bay natural area, which is a place where she loved to walk every day. She titled the project The Making of a Meadow in reference to a poem which sings the praises of an ordinary field or an ordinary place that's overlooked by others. So the work tells the story, and you can see it back here, of how this area, which is adjacent to the University of Washington, was once underwater. It was a lake bed, and then became, as you guys built those canals, it became a city dump. And then it was reclaimed in a mitigation project as a natural wildlife area. So she went on daily walks. She has haiku poems from the walks. She has these beautiful herbarium that she created. She has drawings. It's really a lovely piece of work that fits into a gorgeous box that she had made. This is another work by Mari Gower. It's called Connections, The Willow in the Mountain. And her scientist was Carrie Leroy, who is a stream ecologist at the Evergreen State College. And Mari learned all about Mount St. Helens. And Carrie Leroy, her research is on the relationship between leaf litter and micro or macro invertebrates in streams that help develop stream ecology. And so Mari wanted to tell this story about the eruption of Mount St. Helens and then the restoration as the new stream beds are being formed. Carrie and her students are going out there and watching this total transformation. So at the top, you can see the cauldron of the volcano, the horrible cloud, all the energy of all the wood in that Spirit Lake, gas clouds. And then you can see here how the insects are coming back. There's underground, there were animals that survived. There's birds coming back. There's willow. The willow leaves are falling in the stream. Then there's animals that eat the leaves decomposing, and they then get eaten by the larger critters, eventually fish. So the whole thing is about this reclaiming of the um, of the mountain and how it's restarting, and it's exciting because it's like, shows us how the earth was um, inhabited by plants and animals. The next one is called Tahoma Reliquary by Mark Hopman. And he worked with a science writer, Jeff Antonelli's lab. And Jeff got to know the park archaeologist up at Mount Rainier. And he got to go on a whole lot of excavations that of the encampments of indigenous people all around Mount Rainier going back 9,000 years. And so what Mark did is made these beautiful hand-drawn collages based on Jeff's notes, which he housed in this portfolio. This portfolio has images of native plants and animals, and they all fit into this nice box, which has created in the shape of Mount Rainier. Deborah Greenwood was an artist that decided she wanted to work with the university herbarium. However, because it was the pandemic, the university was closed, and so she had to fend for herself. And she was inspired by cyanotypes made by botanist Anna Aikens and Herbert Dobby, and she was interested in the interplay of the positive and negative shapes of these native plants. And so what she did was she made these monoprints on her handmade paper, all different kinds of handmade paper. It's a really beautiful collection. Next to the last is that I'm going to share. There are 22 of these. I'm not sharing all of them. Is a work called Tencel, A Sublime Love Story. The artist is Jessica Spring, and she worked with Alice Demarius, who's a emeritus faculty from University of Puget Sound, who studies the chemicals in plastic that are affecting our endocrine systems of vertebrates like us, fish, impairing the development and reproductive health of animals and humans. And so what she did was she printed the back part of the book using disposable plastic materials. So those form the back of it. And she letterpressed this poem by Pierce. It's a poem of seduction by Percy Shelley. And so it's like, you can see part of the poem, and the sunlight clasps the earth and the moonbeams kiss the sea, talking about how we love plastic. Here next to her, when we had the exhibit, we collected all kinds of different plastic materials to show adjacent to the book. Anyway, and then in the middle is all the scientific research of how these plastics found in food and drink packaging are affecting our reproductive health. And finally, I'll talk about Suze Wolf a bit. She has a history of collaborating with scientists, one of whom is Diana Six. And she has, as you probably know, a very extensive series of books about bark beetles who are eating forests. And because they are now able to reproduce in more cycles per year, the forest devastation is increasing. And this book was called Resource Competition. On the top, you see a piece of wood that's been engraved with bark beetle engraving. I can't remember what she calls it, but anyway, it's how they're eating the bark of the tree. And on the bottom, you have a piece of lumber from one of our lumber mills. And so what we have here is this competition between the bark beetles and our lumber companies for the resource of the trees. So that's my presentation. And I'm happy to answer questions.
Well, that was absolutely amazing. I feel like I learned so many things on each of them, and I really appreciate both hearing about your work and then about some of the work that you're curated in other exhibits. That was a really interesting addition to it. And I have a question related to learning things. So, in your books, you are very educational, like the soil cores or the change of Cooper Point. And it seems like there's a lot of story that accompanies those. And I'm wondering how you transmit that story with the book. Because I mean, it's like, is there, I guess that's my question. How, when that book goes to live in its new home, how does the information of what you can learn from it get transmitted with that book?
Well, I guess hopefully through visual storytelling in the book. And then the books have text in them that I hope makes the points I'm trying to make more clear. Some of them are like the magic books are trying to seduce people. They'll say, "Oh, that's really pretty," and they say, "Well, go to the website," and then they'll find the resource page on how to plant a native garden, and then they can, go to those sites and figure out, how to go ahead and think about it. So some of the work I see is sort of seduction into maybe going to one of the websites. Um,
What
uh,
about your like the layers of the forest one that had all the handmade paper up above and then the
oh
layers
yeah.
underneath? So that tells a story, but is there text that accompanies that?
No, not that particular book. It has an artist statement.
Okay, well, I hope you're putting this all on a website because it just seems like really incredibly important information that I want to make sure gets continued with those books because they're so informative, they're so interesting and tell us so much about the land around us.
Yeah. I went to Paris a few years ago, and I went to the modern art museum there, and or the contemporary art museum, not the modern one. And they said one of the really missing pieces in museums is place-based work. And so they had an exhibit of like things that are missing from most major museums.
Mm.
And their idea was place-based work, which I thought was really fascinating. And it sort of emboldened me to say, okay, I don't have to go for this universal, all over the world kind of stuff. I can just focus on my own neighborhood. So, anyway, that's what I've tried to do. But in putting together this talk, I've kind of thought, well, um, maybe I should include more on my website that shows the background of some of the things that I showed you.
Well, it was very interesting. Kate wanted to know if the Abby Williams Hill book was one of a kind.
It is, and it's an interesting story. You can see it at the Collins Library, University of Puget Sound. Just make an appointment in their archive section. They'll bring the book out, and you can read it along with. I think there were 14 other artists who made work. They're really all very interesting, and they would not allow us to make additions because they don't allow Abby Williams Hill work to be reproduced in any way.
Wow. The
Yeah,
Collins Library doesn't, or the Williams
Collins
Hill
Library,
Estate?
Collins Library
Oh.
archival policy is that, and so a lot of the artists of the 14 artists that were included were really disappointed because they really wanted to be able to make work. There's some really great work in
Yeah,
there.
to teach people about such an interesting person who is a Washingtonian.
Right. And they won't let us make additions.
Oh, that's too bad.
Yeah.
Well, you
So,
just have to make another one.
actually I don't think we can use it because mine has materials from her journal and images of her, and there's one image of one of her paintings.
Oh, you'd have to make a completely different book.
Right.
Okay, well, put that on your list of things to do. I do want to put in a plug for the Nisqually Delta, your work there, just showing the changes over that. I was able to go. I mean, I've lived in Washington for a long time now, and I'd never been down there, and I finally went last year, and it is well worth the trip out there. They've done such an amazing job of introducing you to the site and making it accessible. And it's not, you don't just go there for an hour. You got to go there for a day. There's so many places to see and learn about the history. It's really an amazing facility that they've built, and you introducing it in your work is just lending people's eyes to it, because it's really worth a visit. It's really an amazing place that they've managed to save, and then the restoration that they're doing there is
Yeah.
very visible and really interesting to look at.
And the next step, the tribes have proposed to raise I-5 through there
Oh, so
because
that it can connect
I-5
onto
is
the other side.
also a dike. Yes.
Right.
And it was funded by the Biden. I don't know what's happened to it now, but it was funded by the Biden, infrastructure funding.
Right, to
So
improve
they're
that.
actually going to move ahead and raise I-5.
Oh, that's pretty exciting.
Can you believe that? That's amazing. That's the
That-
power of the tribes. They are very innovative and can come up with ideas that, state government or federal government just can't figure out how to do.
Yeah, yeah. And then they have the vision to take it forward and make it happen. It's really
It's
great. They've done some
yeah,
really
and
amazing things.
lobby and,
Like the Elwha Dam removal.
right.
So, oh, very cool. All right, well, I haven't seen any other questions. Does anybody else have any questions? You can just yell it out or put it in the chat. We've run over a little bit, but it was so interesting. So I'm listening. Not hearing any questions coming in from the, so I'm going to turn off the recording. And thank you very much for what a great presentation. Thank you for sharing all your work and sharing the work of the people that you worked with. That was fascinating. Thank you for being so educationally oriented too, because I really think it's important to keep learning about our area, and I'm glad that you are giving a voice to those different pieces of our environment.
Well, thanks for inviting me.